Okay. Hello everyone. I hope everything's working. Just was solving a few issues just a few seconds ago. Okay. Okay. Is anybody there? It's not telling me that anybody's there, which is worrying, but well, might as well plow on through as I mean to go on. So, I'm going to do a little history talk about the first series that I made. That is to say, early medieval Croatian history, that is to say, the native dynasty. And I'm going to cover a few things which I didn't talk about in the series because they would have upset the narrative somewhat. They didn't really lead to anything and were far more historiographical than they were. Well, than they had a point to the narrative history. One of those was the Croatian ethnogenesis, and the other is the problem of the dynasty, or the dynastic order, the order in which the Croatian rulers appear in. And both of those problems come down to sourcing. They are basically caused by the problem of not having enough historical or any historical sources in some cases to tell us what happened or what happened in what order. So a lot of it is, well, left to deduction. The historians basically looked at what happened and then made their own decisions, and this changed over the course of the last 200 years as different historical research led to different conclusions and different interpretations. Oh yay, someone's watching. Hello. Now, we're going to start with the problem of the Croatian ethnogenesis, that is to say, the so-called arrival of the Croats, or the appearance of Croats in current day Croatia and the surrounding area. This is a famous painting by Oton Ivekovic to show that shows one of the legends about how the Croatians arrived. One of which was led by the seven siblings, and the sourcing for the arrival of the Croats comes from predominantly two things. One is the De Administrando Imperio by Byzantine Emperor Constantinos Porphyrogenitos, who wrote it in the 10th century who had it written in the 10th century as a guide for his son on how to rule the empire, all the peoples that surrounded the Byzantine Empire, everything that he thought that he would need to know. And in chapters 29, 30, and 31, that I'm just going to pop up the picture. There it is. And in chapters 29, 30, and 31 of it, Constantine writes about the potential arrivals of the Croats. Well, Constantine talks about gives us some indications on the arrival of the Croats. So for instance, in chapter 29, he talks about how the Slavs who were called the Avars conquered Dalmatia. That is presumably can also be interpreted that Slavs under... Hello! How are you? I've started without people, but I'm basically talking about the... Hold on, does the chat widget work? I'm just wondering because I haven't had anything pop up. Oh, yeah, it does. I might want to change the settings there. Just give me a second. Give something a bit cleaner. Okay, that should pop. That should fix itself next. We'll see about the next chat. Anyway, I'm talking about things that I've omitted from the initial first series that I made on early medieval Croatian history, because they wouldn't have been, well, they wouldn't have aided the narrative, and they are far more historiography than they are necessarily part of the narrative. Now, in the what I've gone with in the series was the interpretations that the Croatian arrival, the ethnogenesis, was a very long-term process that took several centuries to slowly start identifying these bunches of Slavs that came here into different groupings, one of them being Croatian, which happens in the 9th century. But the big Slavic arrival is 2 centuries before that. So the sources that talk about the Croatian arrival, and specifically the Croatian arrival, one of which is the Administrando Imperio by Konstantinos Porphyrogenetos, which gives you 3 different stories, one of which is in chapters 29, 30, and 31. Now, in chapter 29, Konstantinos just writes about how a bunch of Slavs who were called the Avars conquered Dalmatia. Now, this is usually presumed to have been Slavs who were under control of the Avars, under command of the Avars during the Great Big Avar Khanate, and who came to Dalmatia at that time. I'm just gonna check. The stream health's not being reported as good, so I'll work on. I hope there's not much interruptions there. But that simple statement is largely conducive. That simple statement, chapter 29, is what, well, we think is completely valid. While chapters... Yeah, thank you. Okay, the chat box also seems to work. Thank you for I should have tested that myself. But in chapters 30 and 31, we get 2 different stories about the arrival of the Croats. The first one, that comes in chapter 30, talks about how Croats came to the current area of Croatia under the leadership of the 7 siblings. Under the leadership of the 7 siblings. That is... Yeah, then that is this one. So... That's the usual... that is the initially believed to be the first tale. There is a second version in chapter 31. And what's curious is that chapter 31 of the Administrando Imperio, if I'm remembering my history lectures from almost 7 years ago correctly, if I'm remembering those lectures, is that the chapter 31 appears to have been inserted afterwards, and because almost exclusively what it talks about is a different version of the Croatian arrival, is that Croats were called to Dalmatia by Emperor Heraclius and were led by the father of Arhont Porga, who and they settled Dalmatia, and then under Porga they were baptized. Now but some assume that this Arhont Porga could have been Prince Borna from the early 9th century. But that also doesn't really gel as a story. Because we do have evidence of earlier baptism, earlier Christianization, mainly due to at least the Prince Vysheslav's baptismal font, which is from the mid to late 8th century, indicating 8th century baptism instead of 9th century baptism. But again, mass Christianization is also a long-term process, and I don't like falling into the trap of having to adhere to just this obsession of finding one specific date for these longer processes, especially in the chaos that is the early medieval period. Because of Croatia peaking too early, quote unquote, and not surviving past the native dynasty not surviving past the 11th century, you don't get the later 12th, 13th, 14th century chronicles that would start to glorify the dynasty or glorify the past, as was the case with the Arpads or the Anjou dynasty, who needed to justify their place on the throne. So you don't get these key moments of history such as Christianizations, the coronations. There's no real chronicle, there's no tradition in the chronicles of that. There's no real tradition of that in Croatian history. But to attempt to find those, some Croatian historians have bent over backwards to be able to find those same moments that other nations have in their history, which are also not exactly, probably didn't happen that way, but they are very much attached to specific dates, specific years at least, or specific rulers, which is not exactly the case with Croatian history because the chronicle tradition doesn't survive. There is also after the Administrando Imperio, we also have as a potential source the 13th century chronicle of Historia Salernitana by the Archdeacon in Split, Thomas the Archdeacon, conveniently called so, who brings a claim that Croats were the quote-unquote native population who then intermixed with the arriving tribes who came from areas of Poland Actually, he calls it I think it's White Croatia. I always get those mixed up, sadly. It's either Red or White Croatia, but I tend to mix those up. So, one or the other. But the thing is that Thomas the Archdeacon at one point calls the Croats Goths. And that has caused some problem. Now, that has caused some problems. Now, it's not that Croats were Goths, it's just that it was a term that could be used to define few things. Maybe just an interchangeable term for barbarian, not explicitly attaching it to the late antiquities, Visigoths or Ostrogoths. Just now, there's also the question of how those terms were used in earlier, later periods, and what Thomas the Archdeacon actually meant in the 13th century when he used those terms. But it's assumed that when he used the term, he didn't actually mean the Goths, but try to use it interchangeably as barbarians of some sort. Now, several of these theories have led to problems and to changes of interpretations, actions, and sourcing as these things were discovered in the 19th and 20th centuries. So you went from one set of theories that tried to find that tried to make Croatians native to Croatia in the spirit of the Illyrian movement, that the Illyrians were there, then the Croatians arrived, and everybody intermixed, and this is one big, happy Slavic family of natives, of native populations intermixed with the Slavs. That is sort of the early to mid 19th century version of the whole thing, but as things went on and as political and social winds changed, you start to get this focus on trying to find a specific Croatian population in these sources. The obsession is to somehow try to find a distinct Croatian people that arrived at a specific date that would then settle every question. It will all be simple, it will all be wonderful, and we'll have a whole national story that nobody could ever interfere with. Naturally, facts don't bear it out and don't bear this out, and I think part of this was also the disenchantment in the first Yugoslavia, and earlier than that, the conflicts within the South Slavic movements over identities and everything else, that then tainted the historical research, and the obsession became to try and detach Croats and Croatia from this previous South Slavically attached movement. Then that is also what leads to the emergence of the quote-unquote Iranian theory. I don't have a picture for that, but you'll have to follow along for that. The Iranian theory, because archaeological digs and some linguistic similarities in northern Iran, modern-day Iran, found indications that there were similarities between the Croatian language and whoever lived there at the time. The problem is that you are basically saying that a migrating population at some point lived in Iran. And again, we can't really assert that there was an origin to it, except that at some point a similarly speaking population to Croatians, maybe that part of the Slavic population then passed through Iran during the centuries of migration. But it doesn't speak to origin, really, and it's again a part of these 1930s theories that are attempting to detach Croats and Croatia from this South Slavic identity in some ways, because of the disenchantment with the Yugoslav idea in the early 20th century. among the intelligentsia and, well, and the political leadership in a way. Naturally, the Gothic theory will be brought back during the Second World War as the collaborationist fascist puppet state government attempted to attach itself and suck up to the Germans, and somehow convince the alligator to eat them last. But that does not last beyond the Second World War, because that doesn't last until after the Second World War, because, well, for obvious reasons. And then you have the almost instant repudiation of that theory in even in even in propaganda songs of the partisans and later communist government. In the song that was first titled "With Stalin and Tito" and then with Marshal Tito, you have the explicit lyrics saying, "We're an ancient people, but Goths we are not," which is almost a direct attack on this theory, which was spread about during the Second World War. Afterwards, all of these theories are brought up in conversations, and they are part of the Croatian historiography, in how you get, when did the Croats arrive. The popular sentiment is the quote-unquote the 7th century, but that is which some dispute because you don't have the specific name Croat anywhere attached. But again, that is the problem of the fact that nobody calls Croats in the 7th and 8th centuries, because most of the writing and speaking world calls this entire population Slavs, because they have no need to distinguish them from one another. So of course you won't get these specific tribes and people to show up and be there for the 7th and 8th centuries in the way that you might want for the historical record. But the Slavic population does move in there in the 7th and 8th centuries. And the specific Croatian name, the specific name for Croats, as in not as part of these these ethnogenesis legends, these sorts of things, is in Prince Trpimir's donation of 852, a copy of which we have from the 16th century, I believe, but it is this is a later copy of it. But this is the first time that the Croatian name is attached to the state, in 852, the 9th century. And it is the point at which the Croatian name starts to spread from what is presumed to be Trpimir and Trpimir's tribe to the rest of the area he ruled over and his subjects, which is what I've said in the series. Now, those are basically the I hope this has all been a bit of a muddle, because I was expecting a bit. This has all been a bit of a muddle. I hope I'm being clear and things are being understood, or I am just talking to absolutely nobody. Am I talking? No, I have 2 people watching. But that is one problem that I didn't talk about during the series, because it is a bit of a historiographic muddle, and it would have derailed things significantly if I tried to write and draw it. If anyone has any questions on this, feel free to ask. but I am about to close this section down. Hello! Yeah. I'm about to close this section down because I think I've covered everything that's in my notes. I just hope that it hasn't been far too chaotic. I can clear things up, and do note that I am not exactly a medieval historian. I'm just also trying to cover something that I've done 6 years ago. I think that is one of the valid interpretations if we take the theory that the term Croat was used to denote a sort of warrior profession or a warrior class, and then that it spread to the rest of the populations as depicted here. I think that is something that would hold water, because you do get the name Croat in the 7 siblings legend for Croatians. You get Korobatos in the creation or in the ethnogenesis legend for Bulgaria, and then you have like this title of Croat popping, or something similar, popping up around Europe, and it seems to denote some sort of population that is, I think people presume them to be a warrior class. So some sort of warrior unit or warrior class that is just living there. So yeah, I think that does hold water, but the name appears to have started the name to denote a ruling family appears to have started with Trpimir and the Trpimirovic clan, which is retroactively called, which we retroactively call it. We don't know what the surname for what the apparent surname for Trpimir's dynasty would have been. We just Trpimirovic is a thing made up by historians. With the main problem that we have for all of this is, of course, lack of sources, and Trpimir's donation is one of the rare parts where we do have a source. We also have an it's also confirmed by an archaeological source, because there is a part of a church that has for Duke Trpimir or by Duke Trpimir written on it in Latin. So, not Duke. Honestly, I prefer. It is in Latin, it would be Duke, but honestly, when translating, I prefer to use the term prince to denote the Principality of Croatia. They would in Latin be called dux, duces, but they are. That doesn't really work, because a lot of other rulers that are titled differently are also in Latin called dukes and duces. But so I prefer the title prince, because that is far more equivalent to the Croatian term of knez than the term duke. And also it works with the term prince, as in prince ruler, as in when Machiavelli says prince. And how that term was used, how the term was used later on, and in those sorts of ways. Now we'll move, if nobody has. Yeah, I haven't read it, but I've heard about it. It's I've heard about something like that, but I haven't exactly read into it. It's it's sort of the problem of Slavic mythology that it doesn't really feature as important until the 19th century and the revival. So I've sort of not really paid attention to it or omitted it because it doesn't really play into it. It is. We don't know, but it is in. We think. What I think, that it is very much still like other areas of Europe. It is still the remnants of the Roman Empire being basically used to build something new, build up early medieval Europe. So it's all very similar to it. And we do know that the Principality of Croatia can hold, and later kingdom can hold its own against other people. Like Trpimir, Prince Trpimir goes to war with what are termed as the Greek people, which we assumed is either a Byzantine army or more likely a army from one of the Dalmatian cities. It's, I think, also... I think it might be described by that Friar Gottschalk fella in one of his writings, but I'm not exactly 100% sure. But... And then later you have the Croatian army participating in the Byzantine wars against Bulgaria, which also seems to indicate that the Croatian area can hold, the Croatian state can hold, at least participate and be on par with those, well, Bulgaria and its neighbors. So I think you have a very similar development as in the rest of Europe, and the big difference in how these areas develop in the medieval period is just, I think, raw population. The number of cities, the population density, number of people that can just do stuff. Hello, random. The mystery that we do have is the Hungarian, is actually the Hungarian arrival. We have almost nothing on what happened, on how the Hungarian raids went on in Croatia. We do know that there is a record that says the Hungarians made it to the Adriatic, but that's also... how did they make it? What did they do? Did they just go around every castle and just go for a dip in the sea? Because that is generally how raids happen. They don't have to actually take things. Horses can go around, and it's sort of similar how the Hungarians make it all the way to the Atlantic coast and Spain. They simply go around fortifications and raid what they can. So it's not... we presume... There are some sources that say that there was fighting between Croats and Hungary, and that one interpretation of the writings of the priest of Dukla says that King Tomislav thrashed Arpad on the river in Slavonia or on the Drava, but that is not exactly a reliable source, and it's been almost deliberately misinterpreted in the 19th century. But to say that there wasn't fighting between Hungarian raiders and the populations that lived there is also not... would be disingenuous. The next problem that I'm going to get into is the problem of the native dynasty and the dating of the dating of rulers. You can do that in Crusader Kings 3, but I don't think You have less chances of doing that right now. Let me just bring the window up if I can. Okay. Okay. This is the ruler chart, which I can hopefully manipulate from the very beginning. Yeah, it goes up all the way up there, and it is the big one. It is the big one that goes all the way down to where I arrived for now. But we're gonna focus on over time, and over time I just made sections of it and then I attached it together in right now I attached it together in PaintNet for this. Because that was one of the programs that wanted to go this big. Oh, hopefully this isn't causing some trouble. I just made sections of it and then attached it all together. The problem we have with the dynasty is that we do have a pretty clear idea what happens at the start, sort of, with Prince Trpimir, his sons, and then, Domagoj and Branimir, who appear to be interlopers who were not part of the dynasty. And it's sort of indicated by the fact that when writing about Prince Domagoj and Branimir, the title Prince of the Croats isn't used, but Prince of the Slavs is, although I've heard contradictions to that, but I'm uncertain as to the sourcing for it, and some people might have misheard it, because you have, for Prince Domagoj more specifically, you have the changes between Pessimus Dux Sclavorum and Pessimus Dux Croatorum, which I think Pessimus Dux Sclavorum is the correct historical one, and then Pessimus Dux Croatorum is something that was just attached later, but I am not sure as to the sourcing of that, so I didn't look into it for this, but it's something that I remember, and it's something that's easy to mix up if you're just talking general history. But we pretty much know the dynasty until King Tomislav. And then it's sort of a muddle as to what happens between Tomislav and Michael Krešimir down here and Queen Consort Jelena. Because we are not sure. We know these names exist. This is a presumption from, one of the history books that I used, and which I agree with on how the rulership probably went. It's the latest. It was the latest historiography at the time, but it's sort of, we're not sure these people who they are, that they existed as they did, that they were called what they are. We're not sure if King Trpimir II is called Trpimir, if was he Tomislav's son, or was he his grandson? Was King Krešimir there where he was? And this used to be a big muddle all the way until the 11th century, because we just didn't have something to outline how the dynasty went. Until this was uncovered in Split. This is bits of the sarcophagus of Queen Jelena. That is the wife of King Michael Krešimir II. And it starts to clear up the dynasty a bit with by saying she was the wife of, that Jelena is the wife of King Michael Krešimir and mother to King Stephen Držislav. And that clears up that part of the dynasty. with how with how it went. And then we again feature in this in a similar, but then again we enter a similar problem with King Stephen's here and this part of the dynasty again, because we again have a problem of who was King Stephen II. Who did he descend from? Was he the same Stephen who married the queen consort? Well, who married the daughter of the Doge of Venice, or is that another Stephen? Thank you. Thank you for following. Yeah, yes, I'll try. I'm gonna try and keep making videos because I'm having a lot of fun. But this is, I'm now to get back to the topic, but we have a problem because we're not exactly sure who Stephen II is. Is he the same Stephen who marries the daughter of the Doge of Venice? I mean, I don't really have any more reason to believe it than the fact that it does make a good story, but it's sort of, each historian almost creates it on his own preference at this point, because we have nothing that tells us otherwise. And there's possibly two Stephens in the place where Stephen II should be, or there is just a single Steve. And then you also have the problem of King Zvonimir down here, which we don't know how he relates to the royal family. I, for one, believe that to become what he did, that he became Ban of Slavonia, and to have control of Slavonia and be under and then attain the Croatian kingdom so quickly after the capture and death of King Peter Krešimir IV, he has to have been part of the royal family, is my honest opinion. But some historians do think that there are indications in how Zvonimir comes to power and what he has to do in order to legitimize himself, that he might not have been part of the previous ruling dynasty. Because why does he need this entire second coronation? Why does he make this deal with the Pope? Why does he apparently discard a lot of the previous tradition if he was part of the dynasty? But it's sort of also but the added problem to that is that we also enter this period of instability in Europe as a whole, because Byzantium is not doing well against the Seljuk Turks. The Holy Roman Empire and the papacy are at odds with each other. The Holy Roman Emperor appears to possibly be potentially overthrown by a revolt of his nobility because he went against the Pope. So if you just attained the throne and you fear for your legitimacy, and you're seeing this big empire have problems with, well, this relationship with the Pope, maybe you are going to try and firm yourself up with buddy up with the Pope at that point, if you don't want to avoid a revolt at home. And we know that there is instability in the 11th century caused by the division, caused by the Great Schism of 1054, because suddenly a lot of the Croatian clergy and nobility have to decide what religious tradition they are following in between these, because everything existed in this land, in this area of limbo between Orthodoxy and Catholicism, and you had several different writing systems and many different orders of monks. You've had things written in Gregoric, Latinic, and Cyrillic writings, and you just needed to now take a side when you previously didn't have to, which causes the a big 11th century problem in Croatia and causes instability by all indications. And that is one of the reasons why Zvonimir probably decides to buddy up with the Pope in order to secure himself on the throne and increase this stability. But again, the problem is we don't have many sources for this, because again, this is also the era where things don't survive into the age of chronicle writing. Rulers don't survive into the age of chronicle writing. It's so close, but yet so far to that, and nobody will really have a later interest to, at least as we know, there might have been chronicles and that have been later destroyed or got lost or something, but we don't have those if they existed. So you get these big problems of there's nobody with an interest to keep this memory of the Croatian dynasty alive in the era of chronicle writing, except not like Thomas the Archdeacon does write about the Croatian dynasty, but he is not writing a history of the Croatian dynasty. He is writing a history of the church in Split. That is his main interest, and that is what the records he is focusing on. So that is the records that we think he is consulting and what he does, but he's not writing about the dynasty. There are, of course, most of the documents that we do have regarding to the dynasty are also basically church administrative records. We know that rulers existed or were present at some locations because the records of donations, land grants, and those sorts of things say that this ruler gave such and such land or made this donation to this church at that point. But that's the majority of records that we have. It's the biggest stone tablet of Croatian history that is basically a land grant record. The Baška tablet that mentions King Zvonimir and that is written in Gogolic and mentions for the first time ever the Croatian word for king in yesteryear's spelling. But that is a land grant. It's a record of the fact that the king gave land to the monastery on the island of Krk. And most of the other things, like Trpimir's donation, is also just a church land grant. And an administrative matter that is then kept along with other records almost incidentally. I mean, this is an exception that somebody decided to carve this into stone. This is not this is something that's survived almost on accident, because there are pieces that survive of writing and stone carvings that might have praised the dynasty, but they didn't survive because the churches didn't exactly survive. So to have this is the big exception to history, that where the Baška tablet survives for centuries. And it survives both the later clearing of the monasteries. It survives the Turkish wars. It survives the later clearing of the monasteries by Emperor Joseph II, and it survives the French occupation. Because it is a big tablet made of stone and not a paper document. You're gonna have a hard time destroying this, especially as at one point it was moved from one part of the church to another part of the church. It was moved from being part of a wall to being part of the floor. From what I've been told by medieval historians, it is almost impossible that you will find anything new in an archive that will be of great significance. It's much like ancient history. Most of the things that are in writing, most of the things that have been scoured in writing have been scoured and found, and there is there's a possibility you might find some minor thing in some far off record, but you would need to basically scour it for hours. It's such a small chance that you will find something new in. Oh, sorry about that. It's a very almost 99% chance that you will not find anything new in archives. Archaeological locations are another matter, because the problem with archaeological locations is that a lot of us are living on top of them. Especially in Dalmatia and those areas, and a lot of archaeological locations are also fields that are being plowed to this day. They are places where houses have been built on top of. It is such. We are living on archaeological data, most likely. It's just that you're not going to start tearing down houses to try and find something, and most of what you'll find is a wall or a pot. It is not a justifiable thing to suddenly go and tear down people's lives because you might find something and you don't even know what you're looking for. Because the data could be from anything or anywhere. Like the big dig of Andotonia near Zagreb of the old Roman city of Andotonia. They know that there's things below the surrounding houses and fields, but are you really going to? But you can't just take people's plowed land and houses that have been lived there and, well, plowed for centuries to maybe uncover a Roman wall. It's not the done thing, and people don't like when you do that. As much as some of us would love to do, as much as I would love to walk the streets of an entire Roman city, it's impossible. It's the sort of thing where you go to also Diocletian's palace in Split, and you see just the layerings of the wall, and you see the old Roman wall that was probably built and rebuilt, and then you see a layer of a completely different stone on top of that, and then you see a layer of 19th century bricks on top of that, and then just concrete for the houses on the interior of the walls. It's all been built up and built upon and built around for the past 1,700 years. It's pretty amazing to think about, but people live there. And people should live there. People should live in old historic centers. Those places shouldn't be just for the lives of tourists and, well, lifeless otherwise. It's sort of the continuation of history and the life. History is life, and you can't stop life to start uncovering a rock or two. As as has happened in a lot of places in Greece. But it's sort of, I've been to Greece, and it's sort of like when you see one ruin, I hate to say this, but when you've seen one ruin, Greek ruin, you've seen them all. There are some unique structures, but some things are just wall. Yes, people live there, but it's just a wall, and you removed all the pottery that was on the floor and put it in a museum. But we do basically have. Yes. Yeah, that's the other problem, because archaeology requires proper archaeology requires a lot of time and effort and people, and you can't do all that without funding. And the big problem is that a lot of archaeological digs are usually very much focused on when, like, a big infrastructure project or a big road just wants to plow through an area, and then they find a few bits of archaeology that then has to be dug up very quickly, so, or lost forever. That's what happened in several times in Split, I'm told, where archaeologists were basically working as the road was being built, just removing things from in the path of it. And so that's probably one of the instances where you will very likely maybe get enough funding to do it, but it's still not. Other digs are not that profitable or funded, and some things are just very remote. You're not going to find things, you're not going to get funding because it is going to be very expensive to house, to work, and to get people to work in very remote locations. Like, there are many isolated castles dotting much of Europe that are on hills and very inaccessible areas, and now very isolated areas that have basically been rotting since they were abandoned, that also need to be properly dug up. But that requires funding, and it's not getting the funding it deserves. You also get a problem that a lot of those areas have also been just dug up by people in centuries past that looked for rocks and stone to build their own houses. So on some of the Croatian islands, you have 19th century maps or pictures of the coastline that show you dotted naval guard towers made of stone that have been built there. Some of them have been built there by the French occupation, even during Napoleon. And you still have them in 19th century images, just standing tall and proud. But just 100 years later, they are flat. All the stone has been taken out of them for other building projects. And of course, because it was just local people taking the stone, they didn't exactly bother to excavate or do anything else. Now, where was I? Okay, I've been through the ethnogenesis, I've been through the dynasty, and yeah, now we're discussing sourcing problems. So that is about what I wanted to do for this stream. I hope I haven't been too muddled for this, because it is a bit of a muddle, and I'm trying to do this live on stream without a script and with just my notes, which is always a daunting task. And looking down at the notes, I noticed that my model is not reacting well when I look down. Anyone have any more questions on it? What did I... No, I didn't have anything else prepared. And yes, I did make this... I got the idea for this image last night when I was writing down notes. Because... How do you depict the fear? The Snačić noble family appears to have continued in some way after King Peter. I think because they are mentioned in the in the Caliter or the Pacta Conventa as one of the noble families that are given privileges by the kings of Hungary. So it's a later chronicle edition. They probably survived. They likely did survive into the later centuries, and they are probably mentioned in some other histories as one of the noble families that did some things but haven't exactly risen to much significance afterwards. Probably also married into the other noble families and just slowly disappeared and went extinct, as we've seen with a few of them, like the oh, I can't remember the name right now, but we've had a few of them go extinct during the videos. It's sort of a curious thing about King Peter in that it's also a curious thing about King Peter when we talk about. Yes, yes, that is one of them, and yes, the Nelipich family is also one that is the one that goes extinct. I think at some point during one of the series we've covered, and yeah, during King Sigismund, I think, and everything gets inherited by the. I'm gonna say the Frankopan family, but it could be the Shubich too. It's the one where King Sigismund attempts to claim all of the land from the Nelipich family's extinction. I think, if I remember correctly. There is, as I was saying, there is the interesting thing when we're talking about Zvonimir's ascension and his attachment to the dynasty. Is that if he is that why one of the reasons why I also think he must have been part of the royal family or some branch of the royal family is that there is no big explosion of resistance or fight between pretenders to the throne after King Zvonimir takes the throne. There is an entire eruption of pretenders after King Stephen III dies, when the Trpimirovic dynasty does indeed die out. Now, it could be argued that Zvonimir was just that powerful that he could force himself onto the throne, but I tend to think that there's more indications that he is part of the royal family rather than that he isn't. The Ban was basically the Ban is believed to have been the top man in charge of an area after the king. It's because you have the sort of we think that like the Ban of Croatia is. We don't really get the title of Ban of Croatia or Ban of Slavonia. We get the title Ban. And then it's attached to the second most powerful noble, and it's assumed to be attached to the second most powerful noble in the realm. So you get the king's right hand, the second man next to the king's most trusted man, or the role that the Palatine would have in Hungary. But then you also have the fact that Slavonia is believed to have been under Zvonimir's rule before he ascends to the throne, and that it continues to be under his rule afterwards. And his marriage to the Hungarian princess sort of means that he won't be attacked from there. So it's Slavonia is Slavonia submits to King Ladislav when he marches through it very quickly, but it is under the King of Croatia. But it is under King Zvonimir before that, and the Kingdom of Croatia. The later, as I was saying, later the Ban would become the top man in a certain area, with the Ban of Croatia and the Ban of Slavonia having a sort of preferred status among the Bans because they are also the Ban of Croatia, Dalmatian Croatia specifically, is also the viceroy of a kingdom, unlike the other Bans who are just parts in charge of areas, who are symbolically lower ranked than the Ban of Croatia, and are more in line as captains and commanders and župans, ishpans of Hungary and Croatia. So the titles get a bit muddled during the medieval period, and we can't really assert that when we say like the title of an area, that the title is equivalent to the other titles. So we need to be careful, because the Ban of Jajce, the Ban of Srebrenik, the Ban of Belgrade, the Ban of Jajce, those areas are not equivalent to are not of the same rank as the Ban of Dalmatia and Croatia, because he is the Ban of an entire kingdom. And in the rankings of the Hungarian court, you also have the rankings of the Hungarian court, the high offices of the realm of Saint Stephen, the high officers of the kingdom in union, of the Hungarian and Croatian kingdom in union, were the Palatine, the Judge Royal, and the Ban of Croatia, and then the other office holders after that. And sort of the Palatine and the Ban of Croatia are there as the vice-regal representatives in the absence of the king. So in some interpretations, the Ban of Croatia technically outranked the Palatine because the king would be present in Hungary more often, so the Palatine didn't really have a functional office, while the Ban of Croatia actually ran ran the kingdom, because the king was absent from the kingdom. Now, so he was proactively at that point outranking the Palatine in function. But I think that the ranking of offices is also a bit not correct. I mean, there is precedence and things, but they are all very much equal to each other when it comes to offices and functions that they perform, because everyone is in charge of his own area. And you will get, especially in the period that we're covering in the current series, the Louis II series, you get debates about do people get to interfere in other people's areas of influence? Does a Župan or Ishpan or a Ban get to send his soldiers into an area to help out or to defend another area without the consent or ask of another? And the consensus and the conclusion is that everyone is to look after their own area and not look after each other's, because that stretches out the resources. But that's also the problem, because the resources are already stretched out. Yeah, and you need concentration, which isn't happening during Louis II's reign. But that is not exactly the topic of this talk. Okay, I didn't think I could go on for an hour about this, but that's boosting my confidence. Any more questions? I don't know what the delay on the stream is, interestingly. Probably should. No problems. I'll probably. It's sort of. I've had a very busy week, and the idea for this stream came to me late. Not late last night, but it came to me last evening, and I finally sorted out the idea in my head about what to do. Otherwise, if I had the idea before, I would have. Well, I would have scheduled the stream earlier, and probably more people would have been aware of it. But I'll try and cover these things a bit and talk about past series and what I might have. I'll. I don't. I'll probably try and do something. There may not be a talk next week like this, but I'll try and think of something. But probably next Saturday too, or Sunday, depends on how I can swing it. I still need to think about what to talk about because I could move to the Arpad dynasty similarly, but I do need to think about what to even say because I mean I have a few ideas about from how I make the series and or to talk specific historical topics because there's a few things, but it does involve a little bit of work with making the thumbnails and everything too. And it's sort of when I think about something, I also think about how I can make an image of it. Exhibit A. But yeah, this was mostly to talk about the things that I deliberately omitted from the early medieval history of. Oh, best would be. I mean, I usually consult with. Budak's books about things, partially because he was also my professor at university. But I try and consult with everything that I can get my hands off, that I can get my hands on at the library or at home. I do use the older literature too, like Klaich and Shishich too, from the early 20th century, because they also tend to mention things that are sort of omitted by modern day historians as quote unquote everybody knows this story sort of thing. But sometimes modern day contemporary historiography tends to miss out. I hold up. I think that they're good for general information. But like every encyclopedia, they do omit things because of size and time and those sorts of things. But and like anything, I tend to think that any book or any encyclopedia or anything is good for research. You just have to always take it with several grains of salt with regards to, well, who's writing, who's writing when and how and what they are. Probably not who's writing when and how, but what is the writing itself saying? What is it trying to tell you? is probably the best thing you can do when reading something, because dismissing things outright because of authors or... Oh, hello. Yes. I've gone over the main topics and I'm slowly drawing to a close, but I tend to think that anything is good. Anything can give you information. You just need to be aware who, when, how, and mostly about what the writing is trying to tell you. And then there it comes to sourcing, cross-referencing, and other things for further, well, for in-depth research. But the best thing you can always think about is not that there are facts and things, but then there's also the interpretation of the facts. And there is a danger in some of the much older writing, even some contemporary writing that repeats older theories, when that it is trying to tell you something. Sometimes it is absolutely blatantly obvious with how some people write. Like there is the history of diplomacy, of Croatian diplomacy, that I've been using, and when the writer starts to go on a long spiel about about Croatian independence in the, well, early modern medieval world, as he's writing about these diplomatic meetings and things, which are... there are some mistakes in it, but it's a very big book that there will be mistakes in it, and some people just forget themselves during writing, but then they tend to go off and try and make a point about something. And like as I was saying, in that book, the author tries to go on about how 1526 was the moment for Krsto Frankopan to seize the Croatian throne and become an independent Croatia, for an independent Croatia to come into existence 500 years early. But that completely ignores the reality of the situation that Krsto Frankopan finds himself in, and that the Croatian estates find themselves in, and that the Habsburg election at that point is somewhat is the only viable option. Like, if you suddenly declare an independent state in the midst of this chaos, you're not likely surviving. And that's why it's on absolutely nobody's mind to do that. Yeah, that's fine. It's then you have the danger of very early historians like Klajic, who writes the first big history of the Croats, which is partially also completely and utterly just copied out of a Hungarian historical chronicle, and there are also parts that some believe that he didn't note down his sources. Others believe that he completely and utterly made them up, which is not a good thing. And that comes into areas where there's where he goes into very big descriptions of events, like describing the arrival of the fleet of Ladislav of Naples. It's equally as possible that he found some chronicle where that was written in. That's Ladislav of Naples during the 14th, 15th century changeover. it's very possible that he found some chronicle that describes that, but since there's no notation or note taking there, some are rightly suspecting that he might have made the whole thing up to look better. But it's not good in some cases, so we have to be careful of that. It's all right. Yes, it's very much like he goes into even suggesting that what the Croatian estates quote unquote should have done is follow the example of Dubrovnik and Ragusa and made a deal with the Sultan. But that ignores the fate and facts of the other areas that came under Ottoman influence. That Ottomans freely removed people from their positions from their tributaries, like in Vlachia and Moldavia, where the politics were completely beholden to Istanbul, and you can't really compare Dubrovnik and the large chunk of land that was, and the much larger chunk of land that was Croatia, with a city-state which has far more leeway in its own diplomacy, and there's no real benefit to destroying that for the Ottomans. Like, Dubrovnik survives for so long because there's no point in taking it. Nobody would win if this little trade center was conquered and looted and razed or gotten rid of. Nobody wins. It's only after that entire balance of power is completely and utterly upset by Napoleon that Dubrovnik's survival is impossible, where the French enter and make it part of the larger Illyrian provincial administration. The fate of Bosnia is sort of like, it's at the point where Bosnia falls, it is already very much shattered, and it's up to individual fort commanders about what they're gonna do. It's the same fate that Serbia has. It's at the point of being raided into complete non-existence of the state. Nobody can stop it. The resources are drained. Nothing exists anymore that can actually oppose it. So, like, at the point where Bosnia falls, it is very much up to individual fort commanders. Do they surrender or do they get conquered? Yeah, see you later. I'm going to be closing out soon. But any more questions? For anyone just joining us, for context, the current picture is my representation of the representation of Thomas the Archdeacon, the writer of the chronicle Historia Salernitana, that when he wrote about the fact that when he called Croats Goths, as and then the misinterpretations of that term later on. But that's about it, because I talked about today I talked about the Croatian ethnogenesis problem that I didn't mention in the series, that I didn't mention in the historical series, and I also talked about some sourcing and dynastic problems and dynastic continuity problems that I also didn't mention in the series because that would have derailed it. So if you want to watch the full video later, those are the things that have been talked about. Does anybody have any more questions? Yeah. Oh, it's... I'd rather not publicly state anything about favorite professors in case somebody might be watching. But I think one of the easiest subjects that we had was... was our history of the 19th century, was our now late history of the 19th century professor who I mean, sadly died during that year. But we had in total of a few lectures on life in the 19th century. It was basically just a lecture curriculum. We just had to go attend. And of life in the 19th century, he was also busy that year, which didn't help with the lecture schedule. But of the lectures we had, life in the 19th century consisted of being born, going to school, going to a brothel, and dying, because he covered general life in the 19th century, schooling, the nightlife in the 19th century, and the culture of funerals and graveyards in the 19th century. Those were the lectures we had that year. So you're born, you go to school, you make love, and you die. That's life in the 19th century. But thank you all for attending the stream, and see you next time. And we might do some other things, and maybe even we might even take a look at some games from a historical perspective. Yeah, that's what we're gonna call it. Well, everyone, I hope you've had a good night. I hope you've had a good stream. I hope you had a good stream. Have a good night, and see you another time.